Hello, Shade. How are you doing, sir? Can you hear me all right? Yes, got a wee bit of a haircut. Had to finally buzz my hair. I do this every 5 or 6 months. I just buzz it all down. Hello, Sam. How you doing? Miss Luck, good to see you. So I just finished doing my first live stream over on Rumble, utilizing my OBS software, and I'm not entirely sure how it went. Um, I fluctuated throughout most of it between 3 and 13 viewers, which is about average for me. That's not bad. It's actually pretty good, given that it's a smaller audience pool over on Rumble. Um, but there was no chat. No chat showed up at all, and I was left kind of wondering if it was a technical glitch or a technical problem on my end, which I suspect. I'm not the most tech savvy person in the world. I did get your emails, Miss Luck. I just have not read through the material yet. I do apologize for that. I will try to carve out some time to parse through that because today and tomorrow are my days off. My days off are Wednesdays and Thursdays. So I am hoping I can work through those um, in order to get back to you with some feedback. I appreciate that, dear. I appreciate the no hurry because I don't do well with pressure. No, it's too much pressure. Tweak. So I'm not entirely sure how the stream went on Rumble. I do know I'm not a big fan of OBS. Um, it's a good program. Um, I didn't know that, Shady J. I may have confused you with Shade Darker. That may be my problem. Under pressure. Ding, 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 ding. Um, oh, okay. Well, I had no idea. But yeah, I went through and I did that. I did the program over there. What I really need to do is get myself to a place where I can justify the expenditure of upgrading my StreamYard account so that I can use the custom RTMP that is required by Rumble over on or here on StreamYard. Because as many gripes and grumbles as I have with paying for something like this. Okay. So you couldn't comment because they require you to have an account. Um, so, Scuba, you were there for the presentation of this material, which is good because I don't want to go through it all again. But thank you, Scuba. Which, which does highlight something of an issue in that Rumble right now does not have the eyes and ears in quantity that YouTube has. But it is my sincere hope that eventually it will stand as a true and available and viable competitor. And now, Miss Luck, are you just trying to get me to go over all this stuff again? Because I can do that. I'm not sure I have the time necessary. Right, this is not going to be a long stream here on YouTube. I know I've said that numerous times before. I always end up going on at length with my kind of diarrhea of the mind. But it would seem to me that I got it out of my system by and large. The points that I wanted to go over and touch upon with this presentation as written. I'll hold on to the papers in the event I decide to do either a standalone or examination of what I've got written down here, or just a secondary extrapolation and presentation of the material. That is possible. That I may end up going over it again in future. Um, but I will also say that the whole concept of the three acts thing that I went over on Rumble um, was in large part was something that I've been spinning around in my head for the last couple of months, and somebody whose channel I absolutely adore here on YouTube touched upon it a couple of weeks ago. A creator by the name of Max Derrett, who has a fantastic channel, does a lot of deep dives on philosophy, psychology, psychiatry, and its application in video games and the presence of symbolism in video games. He did just an absolutely fantastic series of analyses on the Silent Hill video games and the stories of that narrative arc. He a couple weeks ago had a video talking about the number three and its significance across various cultures, customs, religions, philosophies, and he did a great deep dive on the number three and trinities and their vitality across various writings throughout history. And it was just like, you know what? That's the fire I needed under my arse to decide to get me to say something about it as well. He's an absolutely fantastic content creator. There are some other folks who I used to make a great deal of mention of, who I've kind of fallen off of lately, but I don't mention them as much as I used to. But when it comes to the independent genre fiction space, let me just briefly touch upon a couple of folks who I think deserve some attention if you're able to stomach the idea of getting their material in the only place it's available right now, which is Amazon. I'm not a fan of Amazon. If you know me well enough, you know I, by and large, absolutely detest the company, that I dislike deeply the beast of Bezos. However, there are many small, independent, or mid sized authors for whom their only avenue of distribution for their works is Amazon, and I would not want to punish those decent people for my displeasure and distaste for Amazon. The first of those folks would be Scott Burtness, who has a small series known as The Monsters of the Midwest, available through Amazon.com. The first of them being the only one I've read myself thus far. I haven't read the two that he's written since then. But the first book is called Wisconsin Vamp. And it's a charming, amusing little vampire story. It's not a terribly long read. He utilizes a great deal of kind of light, almost sophomoric humor, as well as some tropes of the vampire subgenre of horror, to tell an interesting enough story about a charming and down on his luck short order fry cook living in Wisconsin who is bitten by a mosquito that happens to be carrying the vampirism virus, and he becomes a vampire. And his whole kind of simple, quiet life is turned on its head. The most pressing matter in this young man's life is his bowling league. He loves to go bowling, and that even gets fucked up because of this new aspect of his existence. It's a charming story. I would recommend it. It's by Scott Burtness, Wisconsin Vamp, over on Amazon.com. There's also Terry M. West, who is a fantastic mid-sized press titan of terror. This gentleman has been around and been writing stories since the late 80s, and he's always been a small press guy. He's always been an independent guy. He deserves a great deal of love that unfortunately seems to go right over his head. But anything that you can get your hands on by Terry M. West, I would also highly recommend, especially Bubba Meets the Thang. It's an amusing little story. And Servant of the Red Quill is a fantastic short story by Terry M. West. One of the better short stories I've read from an indie author in the last few years. And there's also Gregory Outen, who has written the fantasy novel Exiled, which is the first book in an ongoing series. I think to date he has produced 4 novels in that series. I've only read the first one, but it is also an excellent read, especially if you're a fan of swords and sorcery style fantasy, which I very much am and always have been. And there's also Miss Bronwyn Winter Phoenix, who is an indie author of genre fiction, mostly thriller, kind of supernatural horror. She did have one story that I was not a fan of, which was, I was not a fan of it, not because the writing was poor. It was actually a very well written story, a novella called Zombie Thatcher. It was basically Miss Phoenix's hatchet job against Margaret Thatcher and the Conservative Party of the United Kingdom. Her socio-political messaging was heavy-handed and ham-fisted throughout, which was unfortunate. It's a well-written story. Don't make any mistake about that. It was very well written, but it was also so overdone with the political messaging that I ended up coming away from that book with a little less respect for her than I previously had. I'll be right back, folks. Sorry about that. So, how are you lovely folks doing today? And again, this is kind of just off the cuff. I just kind of wanted to just basically wanted to say I'm not sure how well that live stream on Rumble went. Neville, how you doing, brother? Greetings and salutations to you. So yeah, I like the idea of being able to use an alternative in the form of Rumble. I'm not entirely sure that right now I've got the best setup for it. Oh, Neville, you did a stream earlier? Oh. Now, I've got the same question as Luck has got here with regards to Tennessee and Mississippi. Now, the only thing I'm aware of or familiar with Tennessee is, well, what's been in the news the last couple of days. Yeah, the shooting. Mississippi, though, the tornado. Okay, I did vaguely hear something about that on the break room television at work. I think it was last night or the day before. It had just been an absolute disaster, like an actual natural disaster. I'm not sure how much I want to dive into the Nashville situation. I think I said the majority of my piece on it in the shit posting area of the Discord. I put out one quick little tweet, and I think from there I am going to mostly remain quiet regarding the situation from Nashville, because for a combination of reasons. One, the biggest one, that's not usually my wheelhouse. These are not the areas or the topics of conversation and dialogue that I tend to engage with, because I'm not a premier commentator when it comes to such situations or circumstances. I'm just not. There are far more educated and expert people who can handle the commentary in that realm. It doesn't mean I have nothing to say, but unless I am directly and specifically asked about it, I am, for the most part, going to keep my peace. I mean, this morning I had a wild hair up my arse and I decided to put out a tweet about it. But I don't use Twitter that much anymore as it is, because for one, it's still largely a raging dumpster fire. And for two, I'm not fond. I've never been too fond of the micro platform. I don't mind short story writing, but Twitter takes the idea of short story to an extreme that I'm not that good at. I mean, okay. All right. You folks tell me, do you want me to make some really unpleasant jokes and commentary about that situation with regards to Nashville? Because if you request it of me, I will indulge that request. But otherwise, I am not going to go hard at it. All right. Thank. See, that's what I figured. That's exactly. That's not my tendency. It tends not to be my kind of thing. And that's not what you guys know me for anyway. That's not the kind of thing that I do. And it would largely be out of character for me to focus on it. Speaking of focus, side note, kind of into an area that's more in my kind of wheelhouse. Um, are any of you familiar with this? I don't know if the streaming service is still even around anymore, but there was an old, not old. It was a streaming service for a little while called Boomerang. It was owned by Cartoon Network. Do any of you guys, gals, remember that? Like back when it first launched, I think it was something like $4.99 a month, and then for quite some time it was free. It was owned by 18, or no, not AT&T, Time Warner, because it was a Ted Turner operation. Okay, Sam, you remember it. The rest of you don't remember it. But Boomerang was basically a cartoon streaming service that featured all kinds of classic cartoons and older cartoons. We're talking 50s, 60s, 70s, good old fashioned Hanna-Barbera, Warner Brothers, MGM. They kind of had like the holy trinity there. Again, there's that number three. Popping up again. It's all over the place. It's a conspiracy. No, it's not. Trying to let the man talk. Anyway, um, but I used to love watching Boomerang because it reminded me of some of those classic cartoons that as a kid, I would lay on the living room floor and giggle like a maniac, particularly watching, Tom and Jerry or Droopy. People forget about they sleep on Droopy. They don't remember Tom and Jerry well enough from MGM. I remember them too. I love Tom and Jerry. But Droopy was also just he was classically memorable for me at the very least because he was such a downer and he was so over the top. It was such I mentioned before on the Rumble stream talking about how classic cartoons utilized exaggeration and hyperbole to get across their message or to get across their narrative technique. And Droopy was the epitome of this is a depressed fuck and a sarcastic bastard. But that's part of what made him so endearing and so lovable. He was like MGM's answer to Eeyore. If you could have that. And Eeyore, oh, the poor residents of the 100 Acre Wood. What do I mean by that? I am referring to an absolute cavalcade of nonsense coming down the pike for the cast and crew of Christopher Robin's childhood imaginations and imaginings. The principal material of the Winnie the Pooh series of stories and old cartoons has entered the realm of public domain. Some of you may have seen floating around the internet mock up pictures for Winnie the Pooh based horror films. Some of these are actually coming. Oh, okay. You got a? Are you pet sitting, Miss Luck, or is this a personal pet who wants up in the lap? Motley? No, I don't remember Motley. I remember Mutt and Jeff. But no, I don't remember Motley. Okay, you're dog sitting. Um, but on the Winnie the Pooh thing, because the material, the original classic material, is entering the realm of public domain, anybody and everybody is going to be granted free range access to their own adaptations or reimaginings of the 100 Acre Wood stories. This is going to create some absolute atrocious nonsense. There was a poster I saw somebody in one of my horror fans groups on Facebook who he posted an image of it was like a very dark image of like a big puffy yellow stuffy bear hand holding a blood-soaked axe, and this terrified looking stylized piglet kind of cowering against a fallen tree in the middle of the woods. And the name of the project was Blood and Honey. And all I could think is, oh my God, they're going to do this. Someone is going to absolutely lay destructive waste to our collective childhoods. Muttley. Yeah, from Wacky Racers, right? Scuba? Muttley had that annoying laugh. And he was partners with some other villain character with the handlebar mustache. Can't remember his name. And I'll tell you, I had forgotten for a very long time about Muttley and about the Muttley laugh until about a year and a half ago when I started listening to a podcast, and the host of this particular podcast uses the Muttley laugh when quoting or playing back audio of something he finds ridiculous and hilarious. And he tells his producer or his sound technician, cue the Muttley. And you'll hear a pre-recorded snippet of the dog laughing. I'm curious to know if any of you knows what podcaster I'm referring to or what program. But he uses the Muttley scale. You know, the more ridiculous or the more hilarious something is, the more Muttleys it's worth. But here's the thing. I only ever saw maybe 2 or 3 Wacky Racers cartoons, and I don't even remember them that well. When it comes to racing cartoons, the only one that I saw more than a couple of episodes of was Speed Racer, back when I was in middle school, years and years and years ago. When I can't remember what station it was, but there was a station in Western New York that had some Japanese anime on in the mornings instead of regular like Warner Brothers cartoons. They would play 2 or 3 different shows and feature them on till the series had run through, and then they would change to a different program. And that's how I first saw the early 90s version of the cartoon Gigantor. It's also how I saw the early days of Dragon Ball. Uh, I think it was the original Dragon Ball back in the day. Not Dragon Ball Z, just Dragon Ball. And I was like 11, 12 years old at the time, and just starting to be interested in the different styles of animation that were out there. Um, I had a good time with that. But anyway, like I said, I wasn't intending for this to be a very long show. Just wanted to briefly, touch upon. I'm not sure how well Rumble's going to work out yet, but I am glad that I was able to get on there and do a live stream, to do the first live stream on there, and see if it's going to be a viable platform for me. And given that the numbers seem to be similar to what I get here on YouTube, I think, yes, it's more than possible that it will be a viable platform for me going forward. For now, I'm going to try and kind of do one or the other. I'm not sure that I'm going to try to do any kind of multicasting, because that tends not to be, that's from people who are more technically savvy than I am. But the next thing I do need to buckle down and figure out is how I'm going to justify the expense of going up to the next level of StreamYard account. $20 a month is not much, but it's more than I have in my discretionary spending. I tend not to spend money if I don't have to. And there are several other subscription services that I have right now that I need to try and figure out, well, what can I reduce? What can I get rid of? It does add up, Sam, especially groceries, for God's sakes. I'm not going to cut my grocery budget. But like my wife and I, we have Netflix and HBO Max and Hulu, and I pay for Hulu Plus Live. And I've got the bundle package, which comes with ESPN Plus and Disney Plus. And that's costing me $90 a fucking month. $90 a month. Here's the downside. My son's favorite programs are on both Netflix and Disney Plus. My wife has a handful of shows that she watches on Hulu. I have a handful of shows that I watch on Hulu. We don't use the live component much, except in the mornings when we watch morning news. But trying to figure out how I can drop down to a lower tier without upsetting everybody in the house. It also, password sharing. My in-laws use our Hulu account. Now, mind you, I pay for the entire thing. I pay the $90 a month. A couple of times I've asked my mother-in-law if she would be willing to pitch in and pay for half of it. But I've only done that 2 or 3 times, and they've been using our account for 2 years. Probably could watch. Well, here's the thing, Sam, is trying to find local morning news, because I want to have access to the local news for my area. And as soon as I can find that, I'm going to end up dropping down because there is a lower cost tier to have both Hulu and Disney. And Disney Plus, I don't really care one way or the other about. Um, the only thing I've watched on Disney Plus recently that didn't absolutely disappoint me was Werewolf by Night. Werewolf by Night was brilliantly done. The choice to go with black and white, like the old Universal Studios monster movies, brilliant choice. The lighting was fantastic. The acting was a little hammy, but done in a hammy style that goes hand in hand and plays excellently with the Universal Studios monsters movies of old. It was beautifully done. It was chef's kiss. It was brilliant. But almost everything else that's come out on Disney Plus has been an absolute shit show. The only other thing I've enjoyed on there recently that was original to Disney Plus was Andor. I enjoyed Andor. Every other Star Wars thing they've put out on the service has made me want to scream if it's not the classic movies. And yes, even the prequels, given the state and the writing and the absolute dreck that is the sequel trilogy of Star Wars movies, I'm willing to give the prequels a pass and say, yeah, I can enjoy those, particularly when compared against the sequel trilogy with its god-awful writing and its terrible direction and its creative decisions that make absolutely no God-fearing sense. But both of my boys absolutely love Spidey and His Amazing Friends. My older boy is obsessed with Spider-Man. And I don't want to take that away from him. And he really likes Zootopia and Big Hero 6. He's watched, there was a set of short, kind of classic hand-drawn animations for Big Hero 6 that kind of followed the movie. They were short little, like, 5 or 6 minute cartoons. Not the newer one that they just did called Baymax. Fuck that. I'm not letting him watch that. But I don't know. I have to figure out a way to drop the cost of all of our streaming and stuff. The problem is Netflix and HBO Max. My wife pays for those. Those are the streamings that she pays for. I pay for the Hulu because it's the more expensive one. So, I mean, with HBO Max, also there's the DC animated shows and movies, and those are brilliant. So I don't want us to get rid of HBO Max just yet. There's also been some movies that have come out through there that have been absolutely brilliant that I enjoyed watching. But we're going to try and figure something out. Figure out where we can do some cost cutting. Because if I can reduce my costs, my end, if I can just reduce enough that I can justify then paying for the next level up for StreamYard, I will use StreamYard to stream to Rumble instead of OBS. The problem with OBS that I'm having is that it is a massive drain on my computer. My laptop is a very lightweight system. It's an HP Stream. It's not intended for a lot of highfalutin programs to be running at any one given time. It can't handle a lot. I can't ask too much of it, or else the whole thing is going to crash and burn. And I can't have that. This is what I use to do most of my writing on. So I can't have that. But anyhow, let me get one more refill, and then anyone questions, comments, concerns before I go ahead and cut off for the day. Go ahead and shoot those at me. I'll be right back. Well, Sam, my favorite genre of story as a reader tends to be fantasy. Fantasy and sci-fi are kind of a tie for me. Um, and I love horror. I just tend to find that I'm far more critical of horror as a reader than I am of fantasy and sci-fi. I can acknowledge when a fantasy or a sci-fi novel is middling at best, but I'll still end up reading it cover to cover more often than not. With horror, however, as a reader, I tend to be far more critical and unwilling to invest time unless I'm really roped into it. Speaking of, that's the next standalone video that I'm currently working on. I'm going to be doing up a review of Peter Straub's Ghost Story, which I finally finished yesterday. And my God, it was brilliantly done. This is one of the best things about going through and looking at older books or authors that I had either overlooked or I hadn't read their entire bibliography of work, is finding these absolute gems in some of their older work that I had just never been made aware of, that I happened upon. It's just when you discover a book that really grabs you by the neck and just pulls you in, it's fantastic. And I'm going to do one of those review videos for Ghost Story. It absolutely deserves every bit of praise that I'm going to be heaping upon it. As far as telling a story, my career as a storyteller began almost entirely telling fantasy stories. I love telling fantasy stories, largely because for so many years I was a heavy reader of fantasy, and in most of my friend groups, I played the part of the DM for our Dungeons and Dragons sessions. I was the DM, the GM, the game master, the dungeon master, the storyteller of the group. And I ultimately ended up folding one of my homebrew campaign worlds into my first couple of story attempts, and thus was born the Temelarian Tales of novels, both 5th Age and 4th Age. And sci-fi I don't do a lot of as a storyteller. I've only told a couple of sci-fi stories. I started off my career, like I said, mostly telling fantasy, with a couple of horror stories here and there. My second published novel was actually a horror story, a horror novella, Motor City Shambler, which I've begun uploading on my Rumble channel. I just put out the first part earlier this week, or maybe it was last week. But anyway, it was within the last 7 days I uploaded part 1 of Motor City Shambler to my Rumble channel. It's a standalone video, and I will be uploading the audiobook presentation of that story part by part to the Rumble channel. That was my second novel, and it's actually a novella. It's not a full-length novel because it clocks in barely over 50,000 words. I think it's 52,000 words roughly. But then I just went fantasy, and I started interspersing some horror short stories here and there throughout. And I had these interconnected horror stories, all set in the fictional realm of Amelia City and the suburbs around that metropolis. So it became Amelia County. But I just refer to them as my Amelia City stories. I love telling horror stories. They're not as prevalent. There's not as many of them as there are my fantasy tales, but I love telling horror stories. Absolutely love it. Because I am fascinated with fear, with the psychology of fear, with the effect of fear on the human psyche, on the human body, what it does to us as living things, and the usefulness of fear. Because it is useful in its way. Fear is what allows us to survive. If we weren't afraid of wild predators, we would have been wiped out as a species before we even formed communication methods with each other. We would have been completely destroyed because we wouldn't have known better than to run away or to develop ways to fight against our predators because we were afraid of them. Hello, mean girl. How do you do? Greetings and salutations. Good to see you. As you're tuning in near the end of the show, I apologize for that. But Sam, I hope that answers your question without being too roundabout. I did it to myself again, by the way. Look at this. I'm looking right here on my StreamYard. I said this wasn't going to be a long show, that I wasn't going to drone on and on and on. I said that around the 6-minute mark, that this was going to be a brief show. Here I am at 50 and a half minutes because I have diarrhea of the mouth. Damn it, Byron, you say every time you're not going to drone on and on endlessly. And then what do? You get on the YouTubes and you wind up talking everybody's ear off. Damn it, Bobby. And I really enjoy reading a well-written sci-fi story. See, that's the thing, Miss Luck. It seems to me the moment I say, all right, I'm not going to be doing this much longer, I just roll on for another 15, 20 minutes. Or someone will pose a question or make a comment that just spurs me forward into more and more and more. I can't keep doing it. But a well-written sci-fi story can be absolutely fantastic. For example, Miss Luck or Scuba. You may remember me talking about this book, Man Who Used the Universe by Ellen Dean Foster. Fantastic science fiction story. It's got its shortcomings, yes, but absolutely a masterclass of sci-fi storytelling. The best book I've ever read and why. That's a tough one. I have a couple of favorites. I have a couple of absolute favorite standalone novels, and I have two favorite series. But of these standalone novels that are head and shoulders, for me, above most other material I have read, the first that comes to mind is a psychological horror book called Broken Monsters by Lauren Bukes. It is an absolute masterclass in developing or in establishing and developing a psychological chill that races through your mind as you're reading it. It has some few elements of grotesquerie, but they are aftermath grotesquerie that is absolutely essential to the narrative within that book. Another absolutely amazing standalone novel for me was the one I just mentioned that I just finished reading, which was Peter Straub's Ghost Story. Absolutely brilliant storytelling technique, and even managed to do a couple of things that I normally do not care for in my fiction, but Straub carried them off masterfully. And the third one that comes to mind as a standalone novel that is a favorite of mine is Clive Barker's The Thief of Always. If you are unfamiliar with that book, I cannot recommend enough any of these three books going out and getting a copy electronically, paperback, hardcover, however you can find them. Grab them as soon as you can. I almost would put the man who used the universe into that category as well. By Alan Dean Foster. Fantastic read. It does have its shortcomings. It's not quite to the level of those other three books, I would say, for me personally, but it's definitely a great read. Now, as far as series go, Miss Luck, the first Chronicles of Thomas Covenant the Unbeliever by Stephen R. Donaldson. Fantastic series of fantasy novels. Those are the books that got me into the genre to begin with. Any gathering of the works of Terry Pratchett's Discworld are also absolutely marvelous reads. Another great standalone novel of his, his and Neil Gaiman's is Good Omens. Another one that I cannot recommend enough going out and getting yourself a copy of. It's hilarious. The wordplay throughout it and the characterization is fantastically done. You can kind of tell where Gaiman is writing versus Pratchett, because Gaiman's sense of humor is very pun driven and has a lot more to do with characterization and like little neurotic habits of characters that he writes, versus Pratchett, who uses neuroses, yes, but also indulges in a great deal of wordplay and absurdism, which is fantastic. So any of the Discworld novels by Pratchett are also highly recommended as a series. And the Dark Tower series by Stephen King. Now, Stephen King, as a person, kind of a piece of shit, in my estimation. Fantastic storyteller. Most of his novels are entertaining reads. Don't go looking for a great deal of depth, however, because you will be disappointed, particularly outside of the Dark Tower series. That series of novels is fantastically done. And if you're looking for a Stephen King standalone novel that I could recommend right off the top of my head, it would be one of the Bachman books, The Long Walk. Now, that story is terrifying in its implications. Not so much that there's anything supernatural. There's nothing supernatural going on in The Long Walk. There's nothing monstrous. There's no monsters in The Long Walk in terms of inhuman creatures. But the premise of the story and how it plays out is gut-wrenching and is definitely worthy of your time and attention as a reader. So, anywho, that about wraps it up for me for now, ladies and gents. I'm going to go ahead and hop off here. I'd like to thank you for tuning in once again. Sam, you listened to me drone on over on Rumble and you came back for a YouTube stream. My deepest appreciation to you for that, Sam. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. I ask that you take care of yourselves, and as always, keep reading.